2021 bikes are out now, and I've found 7 hardtails under $750. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome new viewers. This is Down to Ride MTV. As you can tell by the name, this channel has a lot to do with mountain biking, and I tend to focus a lot on the budget side of things as well. This video, in a way, is kind of another installment in a series of videos I've done on a certain number of bikes under a certain price point. So I've done 8 hardtails under $800 for 2019 and also for 2020. For 2021, we're going to push that price down a little bit more to $750 and look at 7 bikes that fit in that. So in the mountain biking world, $750 is essentially going to get you a budget hardtail. With that being said, I also realize that $750, no matter who you are, is kind of a lot of money. So my goal with this video is to give you some knowledge, to go over some bikes, but also to go over some components, some of the specs, some things that if you're just getting into it, you may not even know what some of these things mean yet. If you've been biking for a while, you're already going to know a lot of this stuff, and I'll leave a timestamp down here, and you can just jump ahead and get right to the bikes. So first thing I want to talk about is wheel size. Basically, you're going to find either 27.5-inch wheels or 29-inch wheels. Now that has nothing to do with the actual frame size itself, and that's a whole other thing. There will be frame sizing, small, medium, large, extra large. Pretty much any manufacturer on the frame size is going to give you a height range of what's going to fit you the most. So in terms of the wheels, you're going to have 2 different choices. In general, the smaller wheels are going to kind of fit better with a smaller person, although you don't have to do that. 27.5-inch wheels are going to be a little smaller. They're going to feel a little more playful, a little lighter. On the other hand, 29-inch wheels are going to roll over a lot of things a lot easier. Just a bigger surface to go over a rock, to go over a root, to go over anything like that. So depending on how you want the bike to feel, that's going to kind of dictate what size wheels you should choose. Now, any bike that you look at is going to come with a suspension fork of some sort. And there's 2 main kinds. There's a coil spring fork, and then there's an air sprung fork. The coil spring is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a spring built into the stanchions of the fork. And the problem with those is, 1, that they're heavy, and 2, that there's no adjustment to compensate for the rider's weight. On the other hand, you've got an air sprung fork. You put as much air in it as you want to get the right amount of sag, which is how much it goes down when you sit on it, and the right amount of travel that you're using as it goes up and down on the trail. One other thing also to keep in mind with those forks, most coil spring forks are not going to have any sort of rebound adjustment. So on a coil spring fork, as it goes down, it's going to spring back up really quickly. And that's not really what you want to kind of smooth out some of the bumps in the trails. In fact, it can actually do the opposite in some cases. So in general, you want to look for an air fork if you can. Most bikes in this price range don't come with them, but one in this video does. Now, drivetrain is another big thing as well, and the drivetrain basically refers to the crank and the cassette, basically all the gears and the chain and everything that makes the bike propel forward. So for a long time, budget bikes used to come with 3x drivetrains, basically like a 3x8, 3 gears in the front where the pedals are, and then 8 or so in the back. That sort of moved to more like 2x systems, and then in 2021, manufacturers are really going to the 1x system on these budget bikes. So most of these 1x systems, they're not going to have the gear range in the back that higher end bikes have. However, you will get the benefit of a 1x system, the simplicity, the lack of a front derailleur, one less thing to go wrong, one less thing adding weight to the bike. So the big thing that you want to look at with these 1x systems is how much gear range you have in the back. A lot of them we're going to look at, you're going to see like 11 to 42, and that's the number of teeth on the high end and the low end. The 42, or the highest number in those cassettes, is going to be your climbing gear. So if you have something that's the highest number is not very high of a number, then you're going to have some trouble climbing hills. And just to put some of those numbers into perspective, the highest end drivetrains that you can get right now from either SRAM or Shimano, they go up to a 52 tooth in the rear. So really easy climbing gear. Another nice thing that's trickled down into a fair amount of these budget bikes is a tapered head tube. So for a long time, bikes came with just a straight steerer tube, and there's really not too much wrong with that, but it's just kind of old technology and the industry is moving away from that. So if you have a bike that has a tapered head tube, what that's really going to do is just open you up to more options in the future for upgrading your fork. High-end forks, they don't come with straight steerer tubes anymore. There are still some lower-end air forks. As long as there are bikes made with straight steerer tubes, you're still going to be able to find forks, but if you have the tapered head tube, you're just going to have a lot more options. One other thing we're going to take a look at is tires. Now, tires can be pretty much a personal preference kind of thing depending on the trails you ride, your riding style, things like that. But regardless of the type of riding you're doing, tires are going to fall into one of two categories. They're either going to give you a lot of grip or they're going to give you a lot of rolling speed. So the more grip you have, the more rolling resistance there is, and the slower the bike is going to feel. On the other hand, if you have a really fast rolling tire, it's not going to give you a ton of grip. So what you need to do is kind of find the middle ground that works for you. In general, that means a slightly faster rolling tire in the back, and that's where all your pedaling and all that efficiency is going, then a little bit more grip up front, because the last thing you want is the front of the bike washing out in a turn. A lot of the bikes in this video are going to come with fast rolling tires in the front and the rear. One thing you can do to save money is replace only the front tire with something with a little bit more grip, and then hang on to that original front tire, and then you have basically a spare rear tire. And I almost forgot, brakes. That's an important one. So pretty much any bike nowadays is going to come with disc brakes. There's two main types. There's hydraulic brakes, which are preferable, and then there's kind of the older style cable-driven brakes. Most are also going to be hydraulic. The cable ones, you do have to worry about cable stretch over time, adjusting them. They're just not as powerful in general. The other thing is the rotor size. So bigger rotors are going to stop you faster. All right, so I know that was a lot of information, and that's kind of just broad strokes. There's a lot more to it than just that, but we can't go over everything in this video. So without any further ado, let's jump into the bikes. The first bike we're going to take a look at is the Giant Talon 2. And this comes in at $620, making it the lowest priced bike on this video. It's a little bit interesting what Giant has done with the Talon range for 2021. They've taken the Talon 2 and lowered the price on it. Some of the specs are a little bit lower than previous years, and they're offering a Talon 1 for the first time ever, which is worth checking out if you have a little bit more money. So in terms of sizing on this bike, they've also changed up what they do. So the smaller sizes, you're going to get the 27.5 wheels. The larger sizes are going to come with the 29ers. The first component we'll take a look at is the fork. Now this is a SR Suntour XCT30, and that is just about the lowest spec coil fork from SR Suntour. It's lower than the XCM that the Talon 2 used to come with. Really probably not that huge of a difference in quality between those, because in either case it's not an air fork, and it has 100 millimeters of travel. As for the drivetrain, this is where they've really improved things. They've gone to a 1x system. It's a microshift Advent 9-speed, and that's 12 to 46 teeth in the rear. And that's actually a really good gear range, especially for a bike at this price point. The tires are Kenda Booster. I don't have any personal experience with those. They're probably going to be pretty quick, fast rolling, probably not a ton of grip. 2.2-inch wide, they're wire bead. As for the brakes, these are the Tektro TKD 143 hydraulic. So hydraulic disc brakes, 180 millimeter rotors in the front and 160 in the rear. So that gives you a little bit more stopping power up front where you need it. And we'll just take a look at that one main geometry spec that I always look at first, and that's the head tube angle. All right, I've got to jump in and interrupt myself here real quick because this is something I meant to mention at the beginning of the video. Now, there's a lot to geometry, but the one main thing that I always look at is the head tube angle. This is something that's kind of similar to tires, where it's going to depend a little bit on your riding style and the type of riding you're doing. But in general, a steeper head tube angle is better for something like XC riding, cross-country riding, downhill riding, something like that. You're going to want a really slack head tube angle, and a slack head tube angle is going to be a lower number. For general trail riding, you're going to be trying to find something in the middle there, maybe around 67 degrees or so. So the head tube angle can have a pretty big impact on how the bike feels, and also keep in mind, it's really the one thing of everything we're looking at here that you can't really change on the bike. All right, now back to the Talon. It's going to be a 67.5 for some of the smaller, 68.5 for some of the larger sizes. So it's not really far on the slack side of things, but at the same time, it's not too steep where you're going to feel like you're just kind of hovering over that front wheel and just waiting to go over the bars. Next up is the Diamondback Hook, which comes in at $750. Now, this is a bike that's been around for actually quite a while, and I don't think they've made any significant changes to it in the past couple years, but it's still worth looking at. So the first thing is the fork. It's an SR Suntour XCM. It has 120 millimeters of travel, so it's got a little bit more travel than the previous bike that we looked at, and it's also kind of one step up in that hierarchy of the SR Suntour forks. So it's a little bit better, but it is still a coil spring fork. As for the drivetrain, it's a SRAM combination of an X3 and an X4. It's an 8-speed with only 11 to 32 teeth in the rear. That 32 teeth in the back, that's your easiest climbing gear, and it's not going to be easy at all. Any steep climbs, any extended climbs, you're really going to wish you had an easier gear. The tires are V-Tire Crown Gem, and they are also kind of a fast rolling tire. Should be a decent amount of grip, 2.35, so that little bit of extra width is going to help you out with some grip as well. Another little bit of a downside on this bike compared to some of the others are the Tektro Aries mechanical disc brakes. Not only are they mechanical and not hydraulic, they're also just 160mm rotors in the front and the rear. So you're not going to have as much stopping power as you would like. Geometry on this, also kind of one of those bikes that just falls in the middle between really slack and really steep. 68-degree head angle. So it's definitely a usable geometry, and it kind of makes sense for what this bike is positioned as. The Vitus Nucleus is the next bike on this list, and it comes in at only $650, so it's definitely on the lower end of all the bikes we're going to look at today in terms of price. But some of the components are actually on a much higher end. So we'll start first with the fork. This is the only bike in this entire list to have an air fork. It's an SR Suntour XCR32 Air with 120mm of travel. Now this is basically the entry-level air fork through SR Suntour. So it's not going to be a super fantastic fork with a lot of different settings, but it will give you the ability to put in the correct amount of air pressure to get the kind of sag and the kind of performance and feel that you want. For the drivetrain, it's a Box 4, which is an 8-speed, 11 to 42 teeth. So 8 speeds, just like the Diamondback Hook that we looked at, but a lot bigger gear in the back for climbing, that 42 tooth. In terms of the tires, this is also one of the few bikes where it seems like they put a little more thought into the tire choice. So it's a WTB Vigilante in the front and a Trail Boss in the rear. So the Trail Boss is a pretty fast rolling tire, not a lot of drag, but still a decent amount of grip. The Vigilante is a much more aggressive tire, which is kind of what you want up front to give you that grip in the front end so that you're not having the front end wash out on you. The brakes are Tektro hydraulic, and they have done 180mm rotors in the front and 160 in the rear. And now we'll take a look at the geometry, and this bike is available with 27.5 wheels or 29er wheels, and that's for the full range of different frame sizes. With the 27.5 wheels, you're going to get a 66.5-degree head tube angle. Then on the 29ers, that's just going to get bumped up to 67. So this is definitely getting more towards the slacker side of things, which is going to give you a little bit more downhill confidence. One other quick thing to mention is the tapered head tube, and like I said, that's going to help out with future fork upgradability, although it does come with a pretty decent fork to start with. The next bike on this list is actually kind of two bikes. So the Kona Lava Dome, which is a 29er, and then the smaller brother of that one, the Fire Mountain, which has 27.5 wheels. They both come in at $749, but we'll focus primarily on the Lava Dome here. The fork is an SR Suntour. It is a coil spring fork, but it's the XCR, so it's the highest level of their coil spring forks, and it has 100mm of travel. The drivetrain is the same that we saw on the giant Talon 2, and that's the Microshift Advent 9-speed with 11 to 46 teeth in the rear. And as I mentioned with the giant Talon, that's going to give you a really good range. The tires are WTB Trail Boss. They're 2.25, and that's front and rear. As for the brakes, they're Tektro hydraulic, and they've gone with 180mm rotor in the front and 160 in the rear. As for the geometry and the ever-important head tube angle, that's going to be 68 degrees, and that's going to ring true for almost every single size in both the 27.5 and the 29er version. And just like the Nucleus that we looked at previously, this frame does also come with a tapered head tube. And we've got another twofer for the next bike here. So this is the Rocky Mountain Soul, and this comes with the 27.5-inch wheels. And then there's also the Rocky Mountain Fusion, which comes with 29-inch wheels. In either case, they're priced at $749. They both come with a SR Suntour XCM fork with 120mm of travel, and again, that's sort of the middle range on those coil spring forks. We're going to see another Microshift Advent drivetrain here, also a 9-speed. However, on this one, it's 11 to only 42 tooth in the rear. The tires are the widest, I think, that any bike on this list comes with, and these are Kenda Amrex. They're 2.4 inches wide. I have no personal experience with these tires at all, but the wider tire I think is going to help out with grip, and also something to consider with wider tires, especially on a hardtail. Any more volume in those tires is going to give you just that little bit more of a cushy ride. It's not going to feel like a full suspension bike, obviously, but anything will kind of be appreciated. So to know that this comes with a 2.4 stock, it obviously means that the frame can handle a 2.4 and probably something even a little bit wider as well. As for the brakes, it's one of the few bikes on this list that does come with Shimano hydraulic disc brakes. They're the MT200s, which is pretty much the entry-level hydraulic brakes from Shimano, and they are just 160mm rotors in the front and the rear. One of the big standout features for this bike is actually the geometry. So it has a 66-degree head tube angle, which is the slackest of all the ones we're looking at here. In my personal opinion, that's kind of the sweet spot when it comes to hardtails. It's slack enough to make you feel confident on the downhills, but not so slack that you're going to pay much of a penalty when you're climbing. And then I think this makes it actually the third bike in a row on this list that also has a tapered head tube, so that's another plus for this bike. Next up is the GT Avalanche Comp, and this comes in at $700. The fork on this bike is another SR Suntour XCM. This one only has 100 millimeters of travel. As for the drivetrain, I think it's one of the few Shimano systems that we're looking at. This is a Shimano Dior 10-speed, and that's 11 to 42 teeth. Now you'll notice we've seen a lot of 9-speeds that are 11 to 42 and even 11 to 46. This 10-speed, the extra gear is really going to put all the gears a little bit closer together, which to me, I think might actually annoy me a little bit. To some people, especially people doing cross-country, where getting your cadence just right, depending on what type of hill you're climbing, is important, I think you would actually appreciate the 10-speed with this 11 to 42 tooth. The tires are WTB Ranger, so those are definitely on the faster rolling side as compared to the Trail Boss that we had looked at. So they're going to roll quicker, they're not going to give you as much grip, but they will make the bike feel a little faster. Paired with that Shimano drivetrain, we have another set of Shimano hydraulic brakes, again the MT200s, and again 160 millimeter rotors in the front and rear. As for the geometry in the head tube angle, it's 68.5 degrees, so it's a little bit on the steeper side than some of these other bikes that we've looked at, but again, it's also not crazy steep like some of those older XC style bikes that are 70-degree head tube angles and things like that. One cool feature on this bike is the GT triple triangle design. That's something that they're kind of famous for, and that is where the seat tube and the top tube and the seat stays all come together in this weird triangular formation. And usually those are all welded together at every point to give the bike as much strength as possible. However, on this GT Avalanche, what they've done is not connected the seat stays to the seat tube. They extend out a little bit farther and connect to the top tube. And the reason that they've done this is actually to build in intentionally a little bit of flex in the rear. It's not going to feel like a full suspension bike, but again, as I feel with those bigger tires, anything to take a little bit of the edge off the rigidity of a hardtail is a good thing. And the final bike on this list is the Marin Bobcat Trail, which comes in at $699. The fork is one that we've seen a lot of. It's an SR Suntour XCM, and this one does have 120 millimeters of travel. The tires we've seen on a couple other bikes too. WTB Trail Boss, that's front and rear, and those are 2.25. The drivetrain is a unique one on this bike because it is a 2x9, and that is Shimano Altus. So I did have to throw in one 2x9 bike on here. But with the 2x system, even though there is added complexity, it will give you a lot more range than pretty much any of these 1x systems that we've looked at. The brakes are Tektro hydraulics, and they are the M275, and they have gone with the larger 180mm rotor in the front and the 160 in the rear. As for the geometry on this bike and the head tube angle, it's 67 degrees, and that is kind of a really nice middle ground. So those are my 7 hardtails, all under $750. But wait, there are a few dishonorable mentions. First on the list of dishonorable mentions is the Trek Marlin 6. Now, Trek has made some improvements to the Marlin series over previous years, especially on the more expensive models, where you're going to get a 1x system, but on the Marlin 6 at $669, you're still stuck with a 2x drivetrain. The other big thing about the Marlin, and I get asked about this bike all the time when I do these types of videos, I just do not like the geometry on it. It's a very steep head tube angle, it's a very XC oriented bike, and it's just not for me. It feels like they're just kind of stuck in the past with it. Trek's a great brand, the fit and finish of their bikes is fantastic, but the geometry is just a no-go for me on this one. Next up on the dishonorable mentions is the Cannondale Trail 5, coming in at $875. You can obviously see $875, that's above the $750 price point that we were aiming for in this video. Interestingly though, when I researched this bike maybe 3-4 weeks ago, it was priced at $780, which is still a little bit above the $750, but I was going to squeeze it in because it has some really nice components. The most noteworthy of those being the Microshift Advent X 10-speed drivetrain with 11 to 48 teeth in that cassette. But it appears that in the past few weeks, Cannondale has raised the price on this bike, and there may be a good reason for that. The bike industry is going through some really crazy times. The supply and demand is just completely out of balance, and maybe they're trying to capitalize on that, get a little bit more money out of it. Or maybe, but I really doubt it, maybe I just got that number wrong to start with. And we've got a very similar situation with the next bike on the dishonorable mentions, and that's the Specialized Rockhopper Comp. And that comes in at $750 a few weeks ago. Now it's $800. And especially at the $800 price point, there really isn't a whole lot that stands out compared to some of the other bikes in this video. Alright, so those are my 7 hardtails under $750. I hope you enjoyed this video, but more importantly than that, I hope you got some useful information out of it. When I set out to do this, I didn't really want to tell you, hey, go buy this particular bike. I want to give you the information that you need so you can buy the right bike for you and the right type of riding that you do. So if I succeeded in what I set out to do, please give me a thumbs up. Did I miss some good bikes? Probably. Leave them in the comments below, that way everybody else can see them. And finally, subscribe to the channel, because, you know, why not? Alright, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.